So I'm Hussein Badakhchani. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Ziglu. What is Ziglu? Where we're offering a global currency account that allows you to buy, hold, sell, and spend crypto and fiat major currencies. Essentially, we're trying to make it as simple as possible for our community to manage their money. And a couple of things that have happened quite recently. We're near the end of our crowdfunding round. So we've hit 3 million, which is 300% of our target, which is great. You still do have a couple of days left at Seeders if you want to join the community and invest in us. I suggest you do. Also, just as importantly, we managed to get about 1,200 new community members through the Seeders crowdfunding, which is great. So if you're in the UK, I would ask you to kind of road test our application, give it a go. In many ways, we're the antithesis, if I can say that correctly, of Netflix. We have a technology team of 15 people. We're born in the cloud. I essentially have to consume as many cloud services as I can and focus the resources that we have on product delivery. So things that are going to make our users, that they're going to delight our users, attract more customers to the system, and really grow the platform. What I wanted to talk to your panel about today are actually a couple of horror stories from my career, which I hope they find entertaining. It certainly brings a smile to my face when I think about them. So I think it was Comrade Lenin that we could attribute the proverb that every society is only 3 meals away from chaos. At Bacs, which is the banker's automated clearing system, I used to work there from 2005 to 2010. It morphed into VocaLink, and now VocaLink, a MasterCard company, but essentially UK retail payments, 3-day settlement cycles. So at Bacs, we had our own version of Comrade Lenin's proverb, which was, at least in the UK, we're unfortunately 4 days away from societal collapse if the payments, if the Bacs payments engine went down. And that was really kind of ingrained in us at a very early stage. So let me kind of think of I've got a couple of different stories that I'm going to put together and pretend it was one story, but hopefully that would never happen in real life. But essentially, I started my career at Bacs as a volume and performance tuning engineer, and that was great. In many ways, I was given the luxury of learning how to assemble an entire payments platform, the same scale as the production environment within the VMP team, and load test it and fix things that were broken. So unconsciously, I was becoming a kind of full stack technologist because I was given the time to do that. And I only had one mandate: make the thing go faster. So and that meant really processing more transactions on a peak day. Our capacity planning team would provide us with a target that would say, we're expecting 90,000 transactions on this peak day. My job was to make sure that within the VMP platform, we could process 20% more transactions than they predicted, and then get those configurations deployed into production before that load actually hit us. So a really great experience to really see how the entire system was built. And I think it's important to say that even though it's 2005, at Bacs, it was very innovative in the sense that we were proto-DevOps before DevOps became a term. We are adopting some of the cultures that DevOps really kind of promulgates now. And also, for me, two key principles are infrastructure as code and immutable infrastructure. And the policy we had at Bacs was scorched earth policy. You have to destroy the entire infrastructure and rebuild it. Now, these are all on-premise hardware. There was no cloud at the time to speak of until a few years later. But we had on-prem data centers. And very early on, we kind of realized, right, what we need to do is delete everything and replace it every time we roll out a new set of configurations that we've verified our performance for the system, and along with new application versions and binaries. So from an early stage, I think we were proto kind of DevOps, if you like. But I remember one day, the head of the VMP kind of rocks up and gives me a poke and says, don't know if you've heard, but HQ is in a bit of a panic at the moment, and they've sent over I'm not going to name too many names, but I will name one name later. I'll call everyone else by their initials. They're sending over JV, who's one of the top guys in the UK on public key infrastructure, really good bloke, excellent on his architecture skills and cryptography. JV is coming over for a quick meeting to kind of go over what the problem is and to see if we can help in any way. Okay, don't think much about it. JV arrives, we go into a meeting room, and without any panic and any sense of urgency, he provides a masterclass in terms of architecturally breaking down how the Bacs system works for us. And as he's doing this, I know a fair amount of this because I'm working in the VMP team. I have to test this thing on a regular basis. But he really kind of enlightened me on a few of the darker corners of the system as well. And I think after about an hour in this environment where we had 4 or 5 people, very quiet, kind of academically sitting there going through what's going on, we didn't have a fix for the problem. But we absolutely knew where not to look for it, or at least where to look for it. And it's a big stack. The back stack in the day was web servers, app servers, a security layer of HSMs, database servers, networks, and storage. And guess what? The technology team was split up across those lines. So there were silos in technology and in the rest of the business. But oddly enough, I would say the heads of those departments and the key engineers were very collaborative. So we'd easily cross over those silos, even though they were all in an organizational sense, though it was structured. We broke those boundaries just to get our job done. And there was a high degree of communication. So didn't think anything of it. JV goes back to HQ, and about 20 minutes later, I get another phone call saying from JV, who's a little bit flustered, and says, like, can you come over? I think we need some help here. Okay, fine. I get into a taxi, I get to HQ, and I walk into a war zone, essentially. Incredibly stressful. Essentially, what was happening is that, well, what happens when the system can't process payments or it's broken? Well, obviously, you restart it, right? That's the first thing that you do. And we had a complex choreography at Bacs where you stop the web servers, you stop the app servers, you stop the database servers, and then you bring them up in reverse order. Fantastic. That seemed to have been working, but there's a couple of problems with it. Number one, it took about an hour to do that, go through that cycle. And we're now in 1.5 days in a 3-day settlement cycle. Bear in mind, day 4, society will collapse and people will get hurt. So an hour to recycle everything and not actually fix the problem is quite a costly kind of activity. And then also it's just it doesn't fix the actual problem. So it feels good that you're doing something, but unfortunately, these payments would stack up very quickly. So we get 5 minutes of like good processing, and then slowly the system will degrade and then completely stop. All the payments will stop processing. So the executive team, which I really respect, I learned a huge amount of them. They walked the floor. I mean, that was a good term to use. The exec team were hands-on, and Bacs at the time was 400 or 500 people. The exec team come in, kind of round up the troops and take most of the floor away into a war room scenario. But I'm just sitting there taking thread dumps on long-running Java processes. 20 minutes later, the CTO comes in, excellent guy, drags me out, says, would you mind awfully coming in and joining us? I was like, fine, I'm more than happy to help. Delighted to be invited. I go into a boardroom, which is essentially a war room, and it's wall to wall, full of anyone who's anyone at Bacs in terms of the technology. So we've got representatives from the whole team, and they're against the wall. And we have the boardroom with 2 vacant chairs. And one of them was obviously the CTO's. The other one, he ushered me in to sit down next to him, was nestled between the COO and the program and delivery guy. Now, the 3 of these guys are amazing, but you wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of them. It was a different culture back in 2005. They had jobs to do there to make sure that the UK payment system was up, and they would pursue that doggedly. So I was in shock, but I didn't realize that until 36 hours later. I sat down next to my CTO, and we did the IBM advert. And for people who haven't seen that before, this is going back quite a long time. You would go around the room asking everyone from the different teams, what do they think the problem is, and is it in their sphere of activity? We went around the room and we were none the wiser. Apparently, we could have just gone home because everything was working, except, of course, it ain't. No one really knew where the problem was. And it was at that point where our COO threatened to go into DR. Now, DR, disaster recovery, back in 2005 was a thing. And it was a pretty drilled process. We had to do this twice a year for regulatory reasons. But it's a small army coordinating a very complex activity that requires switching from one data center to another. There's nothing simple about it, and it carries with it its own risk. So it's at this point that JV kind of lost it and asked me to explain what we just discussed about an hour earlier with respect to where the problem could be. And as I'm explaining this in the war room, I'm looking around to see how people are responding. And obviously, when we start pointing or narrowing the problem space to an area where it could be, which is essentially it was in the HSM tier and it was a network problem, but we're narrowing it into that area, people get very defensive. And there was some heated discussions, there was some finger pointing, but at the same time, there were people thinking. And I remember our head of network engineering, this really smart guy, and I got on with him very well. So on an interpersonal level with the heads, it was fine. We could have very difficult discussions around what was broken and who needs to fix it. But I could see the cogs turning in his head as I was explaining to him where we thought the problem was. And it ends up in a situation where the COO asks me, point blank, are we going to go into DR or not? And then I think three of us at the same time said, you know what, even if we go into DR, I don't think it's going to fix this problem. So much for the disaster recovery plan. The reality was that we had to, it probably wouldn't fix it because there was some shared networking between the two sites, which kind of came out of the discussion that we were having. On the plus side, I think a few people started to realize that rather than restarting everything, we could potentially just restart one component. So I made a bet with the CEO for £10 to say, look, if we just restart the HSM, let's just do that. It takes 5 minutes and it's worth a punt. We don't have to restart everything. Let's just see what happens, because I think what will happen is that it frees up all the connections that are locking up. And that might be enough to let a few more transactions go through at the rate that they're supposed to go through before it seizes up again, and then we'll just restart it again. And maybe we might just get out of jail free on this particular occasion and buy some time to go and look at the root cause. So the CEO takes me up on this. We kind of convene the war room and get back to our terminals. Goes in the corn shell, by the way, for those that don't know, I'm talking about corn shell because these were Solaris systems, and that's the shell that we used. It worked. So we restarted the Thales HSM servers, and lo and behold, the queued up connections that were backed up got cleared, and we started processing payments for about 20 minutes, and then it seized up. But then it was just a 5-minute restart. Fag packet calculation by capacity planning. We're good. We can do this. We can just carry on doing this with the capacity of payments that we have in the payment cycle that we're in. So a massive sigh of relief. Now we have to go off and find out what the real problem was. But luckily enough, head of engineering wasn't wasting his time during the time that we were recycling these systems, and had found a router that was blackholing requests. So it fitted perfectly with this router, by the way, is OCSP responses. OCSP is a way of is a responder to validate certificate chains, which fits in perfectly with the use of the HSN to sign these payment transactions. So we kind of knew that was going to work, and he just recycled the network router, and bingo, system comes back into life. So we're now breathing a sigh of relief that kind of we fixed the problem. It's great, business as usual. The UK will not descend into chaos in about 17 hours time. Well, we had normal deliveries to kind of a lot of updates to the production platform to go through that had been backed up for a few days. So myself, and this is where I'm going to name a name, a colleague of mine, partner in crime, Simon Van Scalino, who's now the CTO of Fronted, ex-Monzo, and my colleague in Bacs. Myself and Simon, who are both in the same team in middleware, were kind of responsible for deploying the new middleware infrastructure that day. And the work started at about 11 o'clock. Targeted to be finished by 1 o'clock, and then we go home. Everyone's happy. Well, we come in all good at about 11 o'clock, and the whole process for building out infrastructure. This is where I say it's infrastructure as code to some extent, but not really. There's no domain language, but our scripts at least were in version control. We use the templating engine to take our configuration, mix it up with a target environment, and spit out some binaries and configuration files, which would then SCP across the target servers, and then a script would run, a Corn shell script would run to start these services. So we're there at about 11 o'clock, and we begin this process, and it just breaks. So, all right, let's log in, have a look at what's going on. And I mean, Simon shouts out to me, I can't see any binaries. Where's the directory that houses these binaries? I think he's just having me on. It's like, come on, no one touches these servers apart from us. And there was a team before us that was in here doing a deployment as well. They were more ops guys, whereas we're from engineering. So, okay, let's have a look. We go from one server to the next, and it gets worse. It's not just the binaries that are missing. The damn configuration files are missing. And I was scratching my head at this point, thinking, for the last at least 4 hours, we've had Java processes running without file systems or configurations working. They're processing payments. How does this happen? These are disembodied Java processes, not quite zombies, but they might as well have been. They are working, but what the hell's happened here? Like, there was no audit logs that we could check to see who's done what. There was some SSH stuff that we could look at. And we're now at a state where we're thinking, okay, everything's working, but if we do our deployment now, we're going to have to kill these processes. And we're thinking, we can't really make this decision now, but how much longer are these dismembered Java processes going to run for, and what's going to happen tomorrow? And I think at that point, that's where we made a decision and we had some confidence in our build processes. And Simon was very keen at the time to explain to everyone the importance of a reproducible, reliable build process. And I was explaining to everyone else that it had to be scorched earth. You can't leave anything in place. You have to rebuild it from scratch. So we were pretty confident we could rebuild the damn thing it would take us about an hour and a half. So we killed the processes, rebuilt it, and it worked. No one really found out what we were up to. We should have raised an incident, but I think there's a huge amount of incident fatigue at that point. But yeah, that's how I think, to some extent, infrastructure as code and immutable infrastructure principles help to save the day for Bacs. Ran through that quite quickly. I hope that's okay.